First of all, Minister, what kind of impact would sanctions on Russia have on the French economy?
It would, first of all, have a very deep impact on Russia, on the Russian economy and on the Russian interest. But it's time for de-escalation. It's time for diplomacy. And there has been a major breakthrough last night, thanks to the efforts made by President Macron. There is the possibility of having a meeting between President Putin and President Biden. The two leaders agreed on the principle of a meeting. And I think that we should all make the best efforts to make this meeting a reality. Once again, President Macron played a key role to trigger this meeting between the two leaders.
And of course, we know that President Macron also, called many leaders over the weekend. But we just heard from the Kremlin that nothing is on the table for the moment. So again, you put all the efforts diplomatically. If it doesn't work, what kind of sanctions should we be looking at?
I don't want to give too much details on the sanctions, because if we want the sanctions to be efficient, we have to trigger the sanctions when it's time to trigger the sanctions. But one point must be very clear. If there is any attack from Russia to Ukraine, we have a set of sanctions that are still available and that would hit the Russian people, the Russian state and the Russian economic interests.
Including energy, certain European leaders have said energy should be off the table. And how willing are the citizens of France to pay to make sure that the Ukraine is safe?
Once again, we are aware of all the consequences, and I will propose to my European counterparts during the next ECOFIN at the end of the week to discuss this question of the Ukraine situation and the economic consequences of the situation in Ukraine. But you know that we took all the necessary decisions to face such a situation, and I think that on the long term, the consequence that we must draw from this crisis is that Europe must be more independent as far as energy is concerned. We must produce more energy, and energy which is emitting less CO2. That's exactly the politics that has been proposed and decided by President Macron in investing in renewable energies and in opening new nuclear plants in France.
So the scenario is still, quite murky, let's say, because there's a transition which France has been leading on. At the same time, there's still a third of European energy that comes from Russia. We could see elevated prices for gas and oil for quite some time. What does it mean for the economy? Are we at a juncture where actually suddenly everything could go wrong?
Once again, we are aware of the consequences that such a conflict could have on the European economy, on the energy prices. We already had a very big impact on energy prices over the last weeks, and we are aware of that. But the political principle is more important. We refuse any kind of attack against the Ukraine sovereignty. And President Macron has been very clear. He is making all the diplomatic efforts to have a de-escalation in the conflict and to have a meeting organized between President Putin and President Biden. But one thing must remain very clear. If there is any attack against the Ukraine sovereignty, we stand ready to react.
Minister, for the French citizens, you've also capped higher energy prices at 4%. What does it mean for EDF shareholders? Are you willing to compensate them?
You know, we took that decision because it would have been unbearable for both the French population and for the French companies to have such an important increase on energy prices, on the electricity prices. It could have been more than 35–40% of increase in energy prices. That's why we took this decision by getting rid of the electricity taxation. 8 billion euros less for the French state. We also ask EDF to make an effort, but once again, the key purpose of that was to reduce the bill for both the French people and the French companies.
But Minister, why just not nationalize EDF then, take it out of the market, given the huge price
That's another question, but for the time being, the key question for EDF is to have fresh money. Yeah. And that's why we decided to provide 2.1 billion euros to EDF, because the key question for EDF now is to have fresh money to face the difficult situation, to go through that difficult situation, and also to invest in the plan that has been decided by President Macron, more renewable energies and 6 new nuclear plants.
So, Minister, would you rule out actually a nationalization of EDF? Or
I'm not ruling out any kind of solution, but you know, if you want to be efficient, you have to go step by step. The first step is to provide fresh money to EDF. Then we have time to think about the best structure for EDF.
How long do you think these elevated prices for gas and oil will stay? And how much pain is it? If it's a year, how much more subsidies can you put in place?
I think that everybody must be aware that till there are some geopolitical tensions in Ukraine, and taking into account the fact that there is a very strong economic recovery in the United States, in Europe, everywhere in the world, which is quite good news for all of us, we will have to face an increase in energy prices. And that's why we need to have a short-term approach, which is to protect the people and the companies against this increase of energy prices. But we also must have a long-term approach, which must be based on new investment and also a new European electricity market, which must be more efficient and less costly.
But, Minister, this is short term, and then longer term you go to the transition. What happens in the middle? For how long can France actually help with these prices and cap them?
We will stick to that policy until we have a decrease in energy prices. I don't want the French people to pay for the climate transition and to pay for this increase in energy prices. I think that it would be unbearable for the French population, and it would be also unbearable for the French companies. So we will stick to that policy over the next weeks, over the next month, and we are at the same time investing a lot of money on new nuclear plants, renewable energies, and hydrogen.
If Emmanuel Macron, as actually a lot of pundits are expecting him, I think they give him an 80% chance to be elected. Does that seem fair?
I hope that Emmanuel Macron will be re-elected, of course. And I think that if Emmanuel Macron is re-elected, but for the time being he has not made any announcements about his candidature, but I hope that he will be candidate, he will be re-elected, and we will stick to that economic policy that gave us such positive results for the French population and for the French nation.
Including the energy subsidies? Including
the energy subsidies for the coming month, because you cannot explain to the people that they have to pay for this increase of prices.
Minister, talk to me a little bit about what that means for debt. So going into the next 2 to 3 years, how do you see the French debt going compared to fiscal stability?
I think that the French debt will go down, and it is already the case. I just want to underline how efficient the political and the economic choices we have made, I mean all the 27 member states, have been efficient over the last month. We decided to protect our companies and to protect our employees. The result of that is that we have a very strong economic rebound, more than 7% in France in 2021, which means more tax revenues, 20 billion euros. We decided to devote all those 20 billion euros of tax revenues to the reduction of public debt and to the reduction of public deficit, which means that we will come from 115% of public debt to 113%, and from a level of 8.2% of public deficit to 7%. Having more growth is the best way of reducing your public debt and your public deficit. Is not enough, but it's the right starting point.
Ministers, thank you so much. We'll go on to those numbers a little bit more. We'll also see what the Banque de France says on what France can do to even increase that 7% GDP growth.